Show me the money.
Hey, it's me. Knock, knock. So, you got my money?
Think about it. You're dealing with numbers all day long. Decimal points, high frequencies, bang, bang, bang. Digits, all very acidic, above the shoulders mustard shit. Right? Kind of wake some people out. Right? You gotta feed the geese to keep the blood flowing. I keep the rhythm below the belt.
I want to stay in Arizona. I want my new contract. Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money? Where's my money, man?
All right, everyone, welcome back to Cap Strapped. I'm Max Dean, and you can find me on Twitter at PanAmFootball. So, today we're going to be doing, hopefully, a quicker episode all about the implications of trading first-round picks and multiple first-round picks for players. We're not going to be talking about trading up in the draft, so giving future first-round picks to move up or anything like that. We're talking exclusively about trading for veteran players. Before we get started, as always, I get all of my numbers from overthecap.com and SpotTrack. I got them all from overthecap.com today, specifically. And again, for the future of Pan Am football, soon enough, we're going to be doing the team-by-team breakdowns for all of the draft tendencies for the current regimes for every team in the league and comparing and contrasting them to other teams. Same with the salary cap usage, as well as just a generalized state of the team. So you have that to look forward to. At the moment, I'm about 22 out of 32 teams deep in the draft researching all the draft picks from previous years. And as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going to do the salary cap stuff so that we can release all the info for each team in each day. But basically, today, we are looking at the teams who have traded first-round picks for basically veteran players. And these four that you're looking at, they're not the only ones, but they're the big ones. They're the ones who have traded multiple first-round picks for an individual player. So basically, today, we're going to look at each of these teams and try and see if there are some tendencies, some patterns in terms of what you give up for a player and kind of where that player is in their previous contract that might give you, some pause or some comfort depending on, how you interpret the information. So let's take a look at it all going forward. So what we are looking at here are going to be the recent first-round veteran trades going back to 2018. And I do believe I got all of them. If I missed one, let me know, and I can do that player quick in an additional video. But I think I got them all. We're going to talk about where they went, where they left, how many first-round picks were surrendered in the trade, the contract situation of the player prior to the trade, and the year that it happened. And then as these each pop up, we'll talk about them in depth. So for the first player, Brandon Cooks, the wide receiver, initially drafted by the Saints, but going back to 2018, he was already with the New England Patriots. The Rams traded a first-round pick for him. Now, obviously, for each and every single one of these trades, or at least almost all of them, there are more than just the first-round picks involved, but I'm not really going to be talking about those because they're not really important in terms of what happens with the contract negotiations. If you trade a first-round pick and a fourth-round pick, the agent isn't saying, you thought my guy was worth a first and a fourth. He's saying you thought he was worth a first. So when it comes to the contract negotiations, that's really what's important. And I'm not going to talk about other players included in the trades and this and that, because this is what the baseline value of the trade is and will be for all of these picks, all of these players going forward. So at this point, Brandon Cooks had played for 4 years and he was entering the 5th year option of his rookie contract. So he was on a rookie contract with 1 year remaining in the year 2018 when he was traded. Now, what happened once he went to the Los Angeles Rams? So he ended up signing a 5-year extension worth $81 million or $16.2 million per year with the Rams not too long after he was traded for. I believe it was a few months. And that was tied for third in terms of the most highly paid wide receivers at the time. So Devontae Adams and Mike Evans took 1 and 2, and then Brandon Cooks, that is, was tied with DeAndre Hopkins at $16.2 million per year. So, overall, you can question whether Brandon Cooks was exactly tied for the third most valuable wide receiver in the league. I don't think that any point anyone really thought that, but the way these negotiations go, that's really not bad. Guys are constantly one-upping each other for the highest paid player at the position. So to sign an extension to a proven player for 5 years at $16.2 million per year, in my personal opinion, that's not bad when it comes in tied for the third most highly compensated player. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other things that go into it, guarantees, contract structure, and that stuff. But looking at it in this sort of simplified overview, I'm fine with that personally. So I think this is an example of the Rams pulling off a good trade. And I'm not really going to be looking at it from the perspective of the team that was giving up the player. This is really all from the receiving side. Next up, we're going to do the pair of Oakland Raiders players, Khalil Mack, edge, and Omari Cooper, wide receiver. Khalil Mack went to the Chicago Bears for 2 first-round picks in the final year of his rookie contract. Again, that was a 5th-year option. And then a little while later, Omari Cooper went to the Dallas Cowboys for 1 first-round pick, and he had 2 years remaining on his rookie contract because he was drafted a year later. And let's see what ended up happening with those 2 players. So Khalil Mack goes for 2 first-round picks. He ends up signing a 6-year, $141 million contract. That is $23.5 million per year, and that took first in terms of most highly compensated edge players. Now, not only did it take first, he also jumped the, at the time, highest paid edge rusher, Von Miller, by over $4 million and became the first edge rusher to make more than $20 million per year. In fact, no one beat out Khalil Mack's benchmark for the most highly paid player at the position for 3 years. So no one in 2019, no one in 2020, and finally in 2021, Myles Garrett and then Joey Bosa both beat it out. But 3 years he held that title, and it's a significant jump as well. I mean, you're talking about over $4 million for, to become the highest paid defensive player in the league by a substantial margin. So that is probably an example of not very good leverage on the side of the Bears. I mean, I say probably, but it's very clear. So that's our first example of a 2 first-round pick trade. Now let's slide down to the Cowboys. Omari Cooper goes for 1 first-round pick with 2 years remaining. Now, Cooper, he doesn't sign an extension that same year. In fact, he doesn't sign an extension at all. He plays out the 2 years and then ends up re-signing with the Cowboys in free agency for a 5-year, $100 million contract, $20 million per year. So, ideally you don't want to let that player go to free agency, but it more or less worked out in the long run. And it was good for second place in terms of the most highly compensated wide receivers. Only Julio Jones was higher, but he was higher by $2 million, $22 million in fact, was his total per year. So Cooper is up there. I believe he was jumped a little bit later at this point, but the point is what was the case at signing. And so second most highly paid for $20 million a year. And again, I think that's going to show you there's a clear, stark difference between what you're paying a guy who you give up 1 versus 2 first-round picks. And you also are going to probably see a difference in terms of the number of years remaining under contract and what that does to the pressure for the team taking on the new player. Next up, we had Frank Clark, edge rusher from Seattle, moving on to Kansas City. Now, he went for 1 first-round pick, but Clark was under the franchise tag, so he, of course, had 1 year remaining, but the franchise tag is a little bit different. So this is our first trade of the 2019 season. Let's take a look at what happened with Kansas City Chiefs. Clark signs a 5-year contract for $104 million, otherwise known as $20.8 million per year, which was 3rd overall in terms of edge rushers. At this point, he does jump Von Miller, but at the time of signing, that's behind Khalil Mack at $23.5, as well as DeMarcus Lawrence at $21 million. So again, depending on what you necessarily think of the player, you could consider that good value or bad value, but in terms of what you're negotiating against the other top-of-the-market contracts, that's pretty good. Again, that's totally aside from guarantees and contract structure. But this does matter in the negotiation. What I'm talking about right now, the amount per year, does matter. And 3rd overall, like I said, not bad as far as that goes. Next up, we have Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver, originally with the New York Giants, traded to the Cleveland Browns for a first-round pick. Now, this is a new situation compared to what we have here. This is a veteran contract player with 5 years remaining. And if I'm not mistaken, he had signed that contract only 1 season prior to this trade. So Odell Beckham Jr. goes to the Cleveland Browns for a first-round pick, and what happens? No new contract. And I mean, that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. I mean, he had 5 years remaining. He's now played through 2. He has 3 remaining, and there's not likely going to be an extension in sight. And so not only do they have 5 years of controlled cost, they have very little guaranteed money involved and a very little dead cap hit involved. Because any signing bonus already would have been paid to from the Giants. So unless they decided to prorate some of his money at some point for salary cap relief after the trade, there wouldn't be any dead money once you break through any guarantees that were remaining. All right, now we have a couple of fun ones. We have the pair of trades that happened the same year from the Miami Dolphins. We have Laramie Tunsil, the tackle, who went to Houston for 2 first-round picks, and he had 2 years remaining, his 4th year and then the 5th year option year. And then Minkah Fitzpatrick went to the Pittsburgh Steelers for 1 first-round pick. Now, I have 4 years remaining. Technically, it was 3 and change because he went partway through the season, but it was early enough. It was 4 years remaining, so 3 years of standard rookie contract plus the 5th year option. So let's take a look at what happened with each of these players here. So Tunsil, 2 first-round picks. He ends up getting a 3-year extension, $66 million, for $22 million per year. Now, that does take first overall in terms of all tackles. Not only does it take first, it jumped the previous tackle, Lane Johnson, by $4 million and pops Laramie Tunsil into the position of being the first ever tackle to break $20 million per year. Then you drop down to Minkah Fitzpatrick, was 1 first-round pick given up, but he still had 4 years remaining. As a matter of fact, you can't even sign an extension until you've completed 3 years, so he's not even eligible for an extension until this offseason. And he probably won't sign one until next year. So they've gotten basically 2 full seasons of play out of him. Probably get another one before they even really start contract negotiations for an extension. Next up, we have Jalen Ramsey, cornerback from the Jacksonville Jaguars, was traded to the Los Angeles Rams for 2 first-round picks with 2 years remaining on his rookie contract back in 2019. Now, before we dive into exactly what happened, let's see if we can spot a pretty basic trend. So, for players who were traded with 1 first-round pick, Brandon Cooks, Omari Cooper, Frank Clark, with, only 1 or 2 years remaining on their contract, what ended up happening? Most of them signed for, second, third, or tied for third in terms of the most highly compensated players at their position. Players that were traded for with a substantial number of years left under contract, obviously nothing happened. So the new team got a proven player at a cost-controlled contract situation. And then finally, the players who were traded for with 2 first-round picks with not too terribly long remaining on their contract, 1 year, 2 years, they ended up blowing the market. So not only taking overall the first in terms of most highly compensated player, they also blew out the competition by a substantial margin. So a lot of these times when you hear about this guy is the most highly compensated player at the position, this is the most highly paid defensive back, this is the most highly paid defensive tackle. Those jumps, sometimes they're substantial, sometimes they're a couple million, but often they're as little as $500,000, $1 million, $500,000, $250,000. I've even seen it as low as $1/10,000 just so that they can be called the most highly compensated. So a jump of 4 or 4+ million over the previously most highly paid is huge. So let's take a look and take a wild guess at what happens to Jalen Ramsey after he has 2 first-round picks traded for him. So, big surprise, Jalen Ramsey goes for a 5-year, $100 million contract, $20 million per year. So, first corner to ever break the $20 million mark. Does that sound familiar? Yes, we saw it with Tunsil. Yes, we saw it with Khalil Mack. We also saw both of those guys become the most highly compensated, which we see with Ramsey here. And he jumps Tre'Davious White by $2.75 million, so almost $3 million, despite the fact that White became the most highly compensated player at the position only a few days before Ramsey signs his contract extension. So not only does he immediately beat out White, who set a new benchmark, he beats him out by almost $3 million per year. So again, a substantial jump in salary. Now here's another fun example. Stephon Diggs, Minnesota Vikings wide receiver, goes to the Buffalo Bills for $1 million. We have another example that was fairly similar. That's Odell Beckham Jr. And what happens with Stephon Diggs? I have none for new contract because he didn't sign an extension. They gave him a marginal pay raise, but it didn't really change his standing. He's still far from the most highly compensated player at the wide receiver position. I mean, I think that Stephon Diggs is sitting somewhere around 14 to 15 million or something like that, in the 14 million range, and you got to go through 10 guys or more before you even get to first overall. So basically, by trading for an established veteran with a substantial number of years remaining, they have cost control and they don't have to dive back into a contract negotiation. This was the first big trade and extension of the 2020 offseason. DeForest Buckner, defensive tackle from the San Francisco 49ers, is traded to the Indianapolis Colts for a first-round pick with 1 year remaining. And let's see if we can hazard a guess at what will happen with his contract situation based on what we've seen from Brandon Cooks, Amari Cooper, Frank Clark, Because he fits in with that category of player, we're looking at what? Let's take a guess. Second most highly paid or third most highly paid at the position. And there you have it. He signs a contract for 4 years. Not 4 million. That should be 44 million, I believe. Yeah, 44 million. No, it's supposed to be 104 million. Just a typo there. So 4-year, $104 million. So 21 million per year, and that does put him at second, which is 1.5 million less than Aaron Donald, who does hold the highest paid at the position for interior defensive linemen. So we're starting to see a clear trend. We're starting to see, very predictive outcomes to what you're giving up for players in any given situation. And now we have just a couple left, and I believe, if I remember right, these last couple of guys, nothing has happened with them yet, but it's been a recent situation. And we'll kind of predict together what we think is going to happen with these guys. Jamal Adams, the safety from the New York Jets, goes to the Seattle Seahawks late in the 2020 offseason for 2 first-round picks. At the time, he was on his rookie contract with 2 years remaining if you include his 5th-year option. He's played through one of those years, meaning this is the final year of contract. Now, he will be eligible for a franchise tag if they want to go that route. But based on everything else that we've seen here, what do we expect? Anywhere from basically a $3 to $4 million jump in the safety market. So, if I remember right, Budda Baker is the highest paid safety at the moment. He might not be. I should have looked that up before I did that. But we're talking about a safety market that I think is around $16 million per year at the moment. So, if this trend continues, is it possible that Jamal Adams becomes the first $20 million safety? And you have to ask yourself, is that really worthwhile? And maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's looking at 18.5 or 19 million. Is it really worth having a safety that's paid that much more than all of the other safeties? Is it really worth having a player paid that much more than every other player at the position, whether it's an edge player, whether it's a tackle, whether it's a corner? Does it really matter the position when you're bumping their salary that much more than every other player in the position? My guess is no. So, before we move on to the last player here, you have basically 3 categories. You have players who you trade 1 first-round pick for, who have only a little time left in their contract. You're paying a premium for that player, no doubt about it, when you extend them, but you're also getting a proven commodity. So, yes, is it going to be a lot more expensive than the player that you would have spent that first-round pick on? Certainly, but you also know what you're getting. And so that's a bit of a trade-off. So you have to think about that and decide what you want to do. And then you're also not going to break the bank in terms of setting a new market. You know that you're probably going to be able to sign that player for the second or third most highly paid at the position when that contract extension comes through. And if you can see a clear pattern like this sitting here, that means that agents see it too, teams see it too. So it's a known commodity, and yeah, they'll negotiate about it a bit, but you'll also spend probably more time negotiating contract structure versus this particular trend, because it's just already kind of locked in. So that's the first. The second is trading for a veteran player who's either on a veteran contract or a rookie contract with a substantial number of years remaining. Now, I will tell you that finding a rookie contract player with a substantial number of years remaining who's good enough to be worth a first-round pick is extremely rare. It was very unusual for the Dolphins to give up Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I think, the circumstances were unusual, and I know they wanted to reset with a new coach, but, that's a very strange situation. So finding that is very unusual, but then when you turn around and you look at the veteran players, the players who are on veteran contracts with a substantial number of years remaining, you're not going to have to dole out an extension very quickly. You just have to decide, do you believe that player is going to continue producing at a high level? Do you think he's going to be a Stephon Diggs who leads the league in receiving or is right up there? Do you think that, he can be as good or better than an Odell Beckham Jr. coming in and being a solid wide receiver? If you believe that, then it's probably a really good value because you don't have to account for the prorated bonus. You don't have to account for some of the early guarantees. So it'll probably be a contract with, a lot of flexibility on your end as the new team. And then the third category are any player that you're giving up 2 first-round picks for with only a year or 2 remaining on the player's contract. And this is where you really get yourself into a situation where not only are you going to be giving up the huge annual value, you're probably going to be giving up a tremendous amount of guarantees. You're probably going to be giving up in contract structure. For Laramie Tunsil, he only got a 3-year extension, so he's going to be turning around and hitting free agents, or not. Well, he'll hit free agency in 3 years if they let it get that far. But he'll be ready for a contract extension 2 years from now, and he just signed this extension last year. So it's, obviously Houston is a tremendous example of how not to do things, or at least they have been over the past few years. So, that's nothing new, but it's probably the most extreme example of what we're looking at. And so, my takeaway out of all of this is the best opportunity is to trade for a veteran player who's still in their 20s, who probably recently signed an extension, but for whatever reason, the team that he was currently on is prepared to move on from him. Not really sure exactly what the deal was with the New York Giants. Obviously there was distraction stuff, but I don't know how bad that really was. And then, with Stephon Diggs, what is it really that pushed him out? I think part of it was just the salary cap situation for the Vikings, and they wanted to kind of reset a little bit. They already had a good wide receiver on the team, so they felt like they could get younger at the other side, but whatever the reason is, if you can find a player like that who's still got a number of years left and you feel is, young enough and productive enough to help you, that's probably the best value. I just wouldn't expect to find rookies with a lot of years left. And if you want to trade a first-round pick for a player that you're going to turn around and sign, just don't trade 2 first-round picks for him, even if you get really excited. That's my takeaway. If you can get him for 1, do it. If the cost is 2, just say no. Just say no. Even if you have to give up a first and a third, or a first and then something, it's still going to be better for you in terms of the negotiations in the long term. Now, for the last player we have here, it just happened, and so I'm not sure exactly how they're going to handle it, but I have a guess. So Matthew Stafford, quarterback for the Detroit Lions, is traded to the Los Angeles Rams just a few months back for 2 first-round picks, and Jared Goff also goes over in that trade as well to the Lions. Stafford is a veteran contract player. He's been in the league for over a decade now, but he has 3 years remaining on that contract. Now, he probably won't be extended this year. I thought they might consider it for salary cap reasons, but they didn't do that, so I don't expect it to happen this year. If they did it this year, they would probably save themselves a lot of money, just because I suspect he'll probably play well. And so when it comes back for extension time, which will probably be next year, He's probably going to go into contract negotiations. With the Rams have given up 2 first-round picks for him and played quite well in their system. And you're going to end up paying this guy who's in his later 30s, probably top of the market money. I don't know if he'll beat out Mahomes, but, again, we've talked before about how that $45 million number is a little bit, it's not fake, it's not really representative of what the actual quarterback market is, because most contracts only go for 5 years, 4 or 5 years instead of the 10 years. So you have to look at those first 5 years to really get an understanding of what he does to the quarterback market. So, where he's probably, if Matthew Stafford plays well, he's probably looking at, Dak Prescott money, like $40 million a year, which is just something I'm not sure you really want to do. You make this big move to get out from under the Jared Goff contract, and you end up with, this player who's on the wrong side of, I think he's on the wrong side of 35, who's probably going to be, getting a huge payday for you, $40 million a year, just because of how you went about getting him on your roster. So anyway, I digress. I won't go on any longer. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, let me know. I think it really lays itself out pretty clearly, Look for a veteran who you think can be helpful with a few years left on their contract if you want to make a big move. If not, find a player who you'll have to pay soon, but make sure you only give up 1 first-round pick. And whatever you do, don't give up 2 first-round picks for a player that doesn't have much time left on their contract, because, ultimately, you're not really playing the value game if you do that. But thanks for watching, guys, if you made it through this far, and we'll see you all next week. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing for Capstrap next week, but stay tuned and you'll find out soon enough.